marine Pokemon biology, right? And this is because we're going to be studying Wishiwashi. Wishiwashi. Now, at first glance, as you can see, this Pokemon appears quite unremarkable, I would say, unfortunately. Almost like it has no strength, like it's a bit weak, a bit not useless, but very weak, right? However, this Pokemon has a very important ecological role and a behavioral transformation that makes it one of the most fascinating species in the ocean's ecosystems. But we're going to get to all that in due time. First, let's go through Wishiwashi's basic information and, biology and all that good stuff. So, Wishiwashi, as you can see, is a very small fish-like Pokemon, right? It resembles a sardine, I guess. It typically measures at around 0.2 meters, which is about 8 inches in height. And it is very lightweight at approximately 0.3 kilograms, which is about 0.7 pounds. Now, these measurements, as you can probably imagine, make Wishiwashi very small. So small, in fact, that it is both the shortest and the lightest water-type Pokemon recorded to date. Now, as you can see, and as I mentioned, it looks a little bit unremarkable as a Pokemon, right? It is a small fish with large blue eyes, which kind of look a little bit like puddles of water. It kind of also makes it look like it's always crying or about to start crying, like their eyes are like watering up, about to start crying. The top of its body is blue and the bottom is grey, while its head and tail are both white. Wishiwashi has two very small fins at the lower half of its body and a small blue dorsal fin at the top. Now, you can probably guess just by looking at it, right? But from a statistical point of view, I guess, when you look at its stats, right? Wishiwashi has very interesting stats, and unfortunately, they are interesting because they are really, really bad. Wishiwashi has a base stat total of 175. That means that if you add up its HP, its attack, its special attack, its defense, its special defense, and its speed, it adds up to 175. And this number is significant because this is the lowest number out of all the known Pokemon species. This means that when it comes to purely to statistics, Wishiwashi is the absolute weakest Pokemon of them all. It is the weakest, statistically speaking. And for those of you asking, yes, it is weaker than Magikarp, for example. However, this is, I think this helps us see that Wishiwashi is a Pokemon that is based more on, evasion and survival rather than trying to fight someone else head on, because it's not going to do well. Wishiwashi by itself exhibits a highly timid behavior. It is a Pokemon that is really shy. It avoids open areas. It prefers, reef, cover, or deep water surfaces, and it reacts instantly to any disturbances in the environment, like, vibrations in the water or shadows or anything like that, because, it doesn't have the fighting skills to defend itself, so it has to rely a lot on hiding and not being seen, In essence, it's basically focused on surviving, It's not trying to fight, it's trying to just escape and survive. Especially in the sea where it so many different types of Pokemon live. And unfortunately, a lot of these Pokemon are natural predators of Wishiwashi. So, Wishiwashi, because there's so many predators that are a predator of Wishiwashi, Wishiwashi is unfortunately in constant danger of falling prey to any creature, right? The thing is, right, despite the fact that Wishiwashi is so small, it is a viable food source for so many aquatic and not only aquatic predators. This is due to how common they are in the wild and how hard it is for them to defend themselves. Unfortunately, it's a Pokemon that is really easy to, catch or hunt or whatever. And it really doesn't help Wishiwashi the fact that they are incredibly tasty. Unfortunately for them, Wishiwashi have this popularity of being really, really yummy. So that doesn't help them either. So, for example, some of the natural predators could be Dugong, for example, which is, a Pokemon that is very capable of pursuing fish Pokemon, specifically in colder waters. For example, Wailmer, who's known for eating a lot of small Pokemon, and obviously its evolution, Wailord, with its big mouth, can, filter a lot of Pokemon and just kind of jump them away. And it doesn't have to be necessarily aquatic Pokemon. For example, Wingull are really big predators of Wishiwashi as well. They're a surface level hunter that, they target small Pokemon, they sweep in and grab these fish Pokemon. And obviously, its evolution, Pelipper as well, they're highly efficient in scooping up Wishiwashi that might be too close to the surface. And even, Spheal, right over here, he may be really round and sweet, but it's also a Pokemon that is known for hunting fish Pokemon. So, also a predator of Wishiwashi. And of course, lastly, as humans, we have also, historically and regionally harvested Wishiwashi as a food source in a lot of coastal cultures because it is a nice and easy way to get food and survive. But there are so many other Pokemon that eat essentially Wishiwashi. Just to be honest, think of anyone who likes fish and they're probably going to like Wishiwashi. And they're probably able to hunt a Wishiwashi as long as the Pokemon can swim or get close to the water, So yeah, the combination of a Wishiwashi's size, the fact that they are so common, the fact that they are so nutritious, the fact that they're so yummy, unfortunately, puts Wishiwashi at a constant state of risk, essentially, right? And this has made it so that Wishiwashi now have evolved to rely heavily on surviving as a group, surviving in, together, a lot of Wishiwashis together to try and survive the best way they can, right? Because this need to, join with other Wishiwashis to try and survive. Wishiwashi does not rely just on its own strength. Instead, it moves in schools. If you don't know what a school is a group of fish that move together, they swim around together. So this is what I mean with collective adaptation, right? And essentially being able to work together with a lot of other Wishiwashis. And this obviously brings us to one of the most important and iconic, I guess, things about Wishiwashi's entire species, and that is Wishiwashi's ability. I know. Now its ability is called schooling, and this is the only Pokemon who has this ability and who can learn this ability, and this really reflects Wishiwashi's collective survivability. Now you might be wondering, what does this ability do? Now, with this ability, as long as Wishiwashi has enough health, many Wishiwashis will instinctively gather together and sort of sync synchronize their actions, right? And this results in what is known as Wishiwashi undergoing and kind of being in its school form, right? Now, each individual Wishiwashi remains its own organism, but all the movements from all the Wishiwashis become perfectly synchronized, creating the appearance of a single massive Pokemon or massive entity. In fact, their coordination is so precise that the group, they basically behave like they are one Pokemon rather than a lot of Pokemon put together. So there are many Pokemon together, but they can pretty much be considered one Pokemon with how connected they are. It must be noted, however, that if these Wishiwashis that are together receive too much damage, the Wishiwashis will scatter and they will lose their powerful and intimidating form. Now you might be wondering, what is that form? Now, let's take a look at this form. Okay, so this is Wishiwashi in its school form. As you can see, Wishiwashi looks unrecognizable, and it undergoes one of the most, I think, probably the most dramatic transformation in Pokemon biology. There might be some that you could argue are more dramatic, but in my opinion, this is definitely one of the most dramatic ones in terms of how it looks, how it acts, its sheer size and everything. But we'll get to that. So, a lot of Wishiwashis, they come together and they form this massive aquatic predator, right? Or massive looking aquatic predator, because this is still just a lot of Wishiwashis, stacked on each other together, making themselves look fierce, look powerful. Now, this aquatic sort of predator has a long sort of serpent-like body structure with a glowing eye, glowing eye-like formations, I guess, rather, that are created by glowing Wishiwashi is actually being like, oh, we are eyes because we are, glowing. Now, this is functionally and also statistically very different. A single Wishiwashi has a base stat total of 175, but in its school form, its base stat total increases to a whopping 620, which I guess makes sense, since it's an absurd amount of Wishiwashis put together, and it kind of like adds up their stats in a way. Obviously not adds up, but strength in numbers is a thing. As a comparison, Wishiwashi in its school form has higher stats than Pokemon such as Dragonite, Garchomp, Mega Gardevoir, Mega Gengar, Latios, Darkrai. I mean, that's insane. That this little fish, or a lot of these little fishes together, have more stats than the Pokemon of your nightmares, pretty much. Now, this new form of Wishiwashi measures at about 8.2 meters tall, or 26 feet and 11 inches, and it weighs at around 78.6 kilograms, which is about 173.3 pounds. In its school form, all these Wishiwashis together become one of the most powerful aquatic sort of monsters or presences, I guess you can say, in their environment, and it is capable of overwhelming even large predators through the sheer coordinated force. In fact, when looking at this new form, even Pokemon like Gyarados will run away. And it makes sense, because when all these Wishiwashi team up to use a move like Water Gun, you're getting so many Wishiwashis using Water Gun. The power of this Water Gun is even stronger than a Hydro Pump attack, because it's so many Water Guns combined together. Another interesting thing is the scale of the Pokemon, right? The school form Wishiwashi weighs approximately 662 times more than a normal, like an individual Wishiwashi, right? So by that we can assume that that is how many Wishiwashi are joining together to form a school, form Wishiwashi, right? So that is 262 more times than the solo form. That's a lot of fish. And obviously, moving so many fish together in this huge form is a bit slower than individual Wishiwashis are. But this is probably expected because there's so many of them. However, they are able to make their movement really fluid to really sell this idea of like, okay, this is one really big and really scary Pokemon, rather than this is a bunch of really small and not really scary Pokemon put together. However, this means that they have to move a little bit slower, but they always move really effectively. And as one unit, lastly, it's important to notice that because of the power that Wishiwashi has when it has its schooling form, when all the fishes are together in the region of Alola, Wishiwashi is actually earned the nickname the Demon of the Sea, which is really funny when you look at an individual little Wishiwashi and you're like, this is the Demon of the Sea. This like tiny little fish is what you guys call the Demon of the Sea. What? But obviously, if you know about its big schooling form, then you know what I'm talking about. So, let's move on and look at some of the moves and combat behavior that Wishiwashi have. Now, in both forms, individual and school form, Wishiwashi has a variety of water-type attacks that you would kind of expect from a water-type Pokemon. However, as you can probably imagine, the moves are so much stronger when they are used in the schooling form rather than when they are used by themselves, right? One Wishiwashi using Water Gun, probably not gonna do much. Over 200 of them using Water Gun, gonna do a lot more damage. So, some of the moves that it can learn include, as I said, Water Gun, Brine, Aqua Tail, Hydro Pump, and in its solo form, so one individual Wishiwashi, these attacks are going to be quite weak and primarily used to do something to get out of the way, to get away from there, But in the school form, when they're all together, the same moves become a lot more powerful due to the massive amount of Wishiwashis that are synchronized to use this move, right? So, the key principle is quite simple. Wishiwashi does not gain a new power or a new evolution or a mega evolution or, I don't know, a special attack in its school form. Rather, it multiplies what it can currently do and amplifies that a lot through their coordination, right? And, oh yeah, of course, it can also learn other moves, such as Double Edge, Uproar, and Beat Up. And with TMs, it can even learn more moves, such as the Bug-type move U-Turn, and the Ice move, Ice Beam, the Psychic move Rest, the Steel-type move Iron Tail, and even the Ground-type move Earthquake. Yeah, which is kind of crazy. And it even gets a lot more moves, especially a lot of moves which are water and normal type moves. And just before we finish all the moves, let me once again emphasize the fact that it can learn Earthquake is insane. Obviously, a solo Wishiwashi using Earthquake, like this tiny fish using Earthquake, is not going to do a lot of damage, right? Because even if it is a very strong move, if the Pokemon using that move is very weak, the move is not going to do that much damage anyways. But if you have over 200 of Wishiwashis, essentially, using that move at once, it's going to do a lot more damage. And that's what you have to get from the power of the different forms of Wishiwashi. Now, that's going to be everything for the moves. And obviously, with the abilities, we've already looked at it because schooling is its only ability, and it's basically what makes the Pokemon in a way. So, let's look at one last thing, and this is Wishiwashi's kind of like role in the environment, right? Wishiwashi, in its solo form especially, is a common prey species. As I mentioned, a lot of Pokemon prey on Wishiwashi, right? This means that even if they're very weak in a way, I guess, in a really roundabout way, and they are really contributing to the food chain of many aquatic predators. It's very unfortunate for Wishiwashi, but it's very important as a part of the marine ecosystem. Without Wishiwashis, a lot of other species of Pokemon would not be able to eat, would not be able to survive, would not be able to evolve, you know. And then when we look at Wishiwashi's school form, this is Wishiwashi being like, okay, it's time for me to be a bit in control, you know, to become a dominant force within the environment, and being able to kind of fight against these predators just through its presence. As I said, for example, even scaring away Gyarados, which is a scary Pokemon in itself. Now, this behavior is really rare in wild Pokemon in general. Yes, there are a lot of Pokemon that live with other Pokemon, that help other Pokemon, that live in groups, that have strong friendships, you know, and as I said, they can be wild Pokemon. They don't have to be a trainer who's friends with their Pokemon. They can be two random wild Pokemon who are friends. But I think the connection that Wishiwashi has with its fellow Wishiwashis is a different kind of connection, as they essentially kind of become a new Pokemon to defend themselves. And yeah, I think that's really admirable, and I think that is a really powerful connection. And with that being said, that will be everything for Wishiwashi today. As a quick conclusion, Wishiwashi, as I mentioned, represents one of the most extreme examples of collective survival in the Pokemon world. By itself, it is quite literally the weakest Pokemon when we look at specifically its stats. It is a fragile Pokemon, and it is very easy to prey on, unfortunately. But when it joins together, it becomes a massive, coordinated monster, if you want to call it that, that is capable of fighting back against a lot of the predators that they could not deal with when they were alone, and even scaring them away, you know. So, Wishiwashi, I believe, shows us that strength is not always individual. Sometimes strength comes from unity, from synchronization, and from shared survival instinct. So, as I said, strength in numbers. And in the case of Wishiwashi, strength in numbers is really important because it is essentially the difference between being attacked or, you know, doing the attacking. It is the difference between being vulnerable or being dominant, being in control. So, with that being said, thank you so much for coming to class. I hope you learned a little bit about this extreme case of teamwork, and I hope to see you soon.